Hey nerds. So, I'm going to talk about my favorite professional mangler of philosophy and former mathematician, James Lindsay, doing some more mangling of philosophy and mangling of theology as well. And he's being asked in an interview by this sycophantic Christian about basically how to be a better Christian in order to fight wokeness or some shit. So, let's get into this crackpottery.
Wanted to thank you because you've done more to defend historical Christianity than most church leaders.
You've done more to establish historical Christianity than most church leaders.
Yeah, bro. James Lindsay is a hero of Christianity.
And courage are a blessing of the church. I'm a pastor and I teach worldview.
Oh dear.
And so here's the premise of the question. I had other
Any pastor who thinks James Lindsay knows anything about theology is a very poor pastor who does not know much about theology. Ask any theologian. He doesn't know what the fuck he's talking about in terms of Marxism being Gnostic Christianity or any of his other fucking stupid theological arguments.
theologians have arrived at the conclusion that Marxism is a Christian heresy, co-opting biblical language, untethering it from its metaphysical roots, and inventing and inverting biblical anthropology and Christian ethics as it seeks to impose its moral vision on the world.
The fuck is up with that? That's not even close to true. There's nothing theological about Marxism. He got this idea from fucking wacko anti-Marxist people. There's nothing in Marx and Engels about Marxism being Gnostic Christianity and them literally using biblical language to create this like anti-Christian metaphysics or some shit. That's basically the most simple way to sum up his fucking unhinged argument. And as he does with philosophy, he's just an expert at cherry picking, and then he gets the minority opinions that he's looking for, and then he presents them as if they represent an entire movement of thought as a monolith, like as if like he'll find these obscure people who say that Marxism is Gnostic Christianity, and then he'll say, see, most Marxists believe this, and he'll say the same thing about theology and anything political at all.
Therefore, first and foremost, we have a theological problem. As such, what is your advice to the church, or more specifically for pastors, to help us rid ourselves of this deadly parasite?
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, pastors, don't take advice from James Lindsay about fucking Christianity. Like, take advice from other fucking from theologians or other pastors, for fuck's sake.
I really appreciate those kind words. I think that this is an important question. I think you are right in a sense. I mean, it's complicated, not to be like a weirdo, but it is. Marxism is a Christian heresy.
No.
But really, Hegel created the Christian heresy, and then Marx turned that upside down.
No, this is where he's fucking stupid about philosophy as usual too. Hegel did not create Marxism and then Marx turned it upside down. Marx was in opposition to Hegel. What is it? Oh, dialectical materialism, or but what is improperly called the dialectic in terms of Hegel by a lot of people, even though he never actually used that term. It's the way that many people use to describe the dialectic in the way that he's supposedly presenting it as like one argument going up against another argument, but that's not actually the way. So he's basing this on a straw man and then getting Hegel backwards and then getting Marx backwards and making it sound like he knows what he's talking about, even though he's making totally fucking specious arguments.
So you have the inversion of Christian virtues and values. I don't think specifically to invert Christian virtues and values. You had Hegel try to appropriate them into.
I think hey Dusty, I think that he used to be an atheist, and now I don't know whether he considers himself a Christian, but it sure sounds that way. But I'd say he's definitely not an atheist anymore. Think about all the pro-Christian arguments and like pro-Christian anti-Marxist arguments he makes when he gets together with Jordan Peterson and Joe Rogan and any of those people. but I'm not 100% sure whether he's actually a Christian. I'm just pretty sure that he's not an atheist.
Into a theosophical.
Because remember, before he got into all of this, like, fucking anti-woke shit, a long time ago, read Nice Wonder, Dusty, from Cordial Curiosity. A long time ago, he wrote that. I read this book because Read Nice Wonder recommended it to me. It's James Lindsay's book it's called something fucking phenomenally egotistical, like everyone is wrong about God. And it's basically just his militant atheist argument saying the argument for God is bankrupt and it's intellectually dead or something. He obviously doesn't believe that anymore because he doesn't seem to be an atheist, or at least he sounds like a Christian. Who knows?
Mold, and then Marx tried to turn Hegel inside out, so there's like a little extra step to it, and it's a little more complicated. But the short version of that is, yeah, it's a Christian heresy.
No.
And it's not like I've used the word Gnostic over and over and over again, which there were Gnostic cults that were Christian heresies all through the 1st and 2nd century. Irenaeus, and against heresies, condemned them.
Gnostic cults were Christian heresies in the 12th century. That has nothing to fucking do with Marxism, dude. Like, Gnostic Christian heresies in the 12th century. First of all, Christian heresies, they were labeled that way by the dominant church at the time. We're just talking about the Christian church because this was long before the Protestant Reformation and long before Marxism was ever even a thought. This is like deep in the height of feudalism. This has nothing fucking whatsoever to do with Marxism.
And put the nail kind of in that coffin. You can read actually in Augustine, where he's talking about the 80 some odd heresies of the Christian church by the beginning of the 4th century that were being put down.
Augustine talks about Christian heresies by the time of the 4th century. Still, no connection whatsoever between that and Marxism. He said fucking ridiculous, man.
This is a constant war that was being waged at the time. Of course, when you read Confessions by Augustine, he's confessing to having been a Hermeticist. If you didn't know that, he was a wizard and he became a Catholic and was confessing to his
He wasn't a wizard. That's not even what Hermeticism means. And he wasn't necessarily a Hermeticist. His confession wasn't specifically about being a Hermeticist. It's about his confessions in terms of like how he formed his actual elaborate theology. It's not specifically from Hermeticism. Like, read the fucking book, dude. Maybe that's your main takeaway, but that's not what the book is all about.
Previous life. A lot of people think it was like sexual immorality and all this. No, that's just part of being in a cult. And he's confessing to have been a Hermeticist. So what I think we just keep kind of hitting on, but I'm not saying the word clearly because I'm not talking specifically.
I mean, Hermeticism is arguably a cult in the same way that Christianity is, but also in the same way that Christianity is a religion. Hermeticism is not any more or less of a religion. It preceded the way that we understand Christianity today, before the book that he was talking about.
Specifically to Christians and pastors in my messaging right now is that the fruit of the spirit of discernment is actually what needs to be there. And I think pastors are there and their job is largely to provide that discernment. I don't want to. I think it's slightly inappropriate, at least in not my particular skill set, to try to parse theology.
At least he has a tad of humbleness there.
For you guys, that's your lot. It's like I keep getting called, hey James, help us with education. I'm like, damn it, I have to learn education theory. Hey James, help us with law. I don't want to learn law. Hey James.
Okay, but maybe you should consider questioning your ego and saying, these people are asking me for religious and legal and education advice. Maybe I should point them to actual experts. Maybe I should question why people are asking me these questions. Maybe I should re-examine the foundations of my knowledge. He's never going to do that.
James, what do we do with theology? Really? No, there's lots of you. So what you need to do is...
We've already gotten into how dumb he is in terms of theology.
I think what pastors need to do is work on their discernment and get very, very clear, and then bring that discernment to their flock, because that's their job. And I think that it's absolutely crucial that we have pastors that are
their flock, so to speak, doesn't necessarily have to be a crystal clear theology. That's more of an aspect of fundamentalism, which is why fundamentalism appeals to so much, because fundamentalism claims to have simple answers for every question, which is not, that's just a boring theology to me. And if you want to, like, if you're going to be a Christian or something like that, if I were going to be, I'd try to pick like a more interesting theology. Like, for example, the one I'm talking about in uh, Richard Rorty and Gianni Vattimo's book. Richard Rorty is an atheist pragmatist, and Gianni Vattimo is a Catholic philosopher, and they talk about how Nietzsche's Death of God opened up the door for a new religion without even a metaphysical God, without metaphysics or a metaphysical God, which is very interesting.
are doing that. And just if I might throw some gospel at you, in one of my favorite passages, which means that I don't have that many in my chamber, and it makes it sound like I know the gospel way
At least he's being a tad bit humble there.
better than I do. But in Matthew 10:16, Jesus very famously says, and I talk about this all the time, I send you out, which means into the dangerous situation to go evangelize. He sends out his apostles. I send you out, and you need to be as discerning as serpents, or as wise as serpents, and as gentle as doves. Well, that's two commandments that Jesus gives for how you have to
Being wise as serpents, that sounds manipulative if you're talking about like the story of Adam and Eve and the snake tempting Eve with the apple of knowledge, and then gaining knowledge was bad and led to the eternal sin of humanity and that kind of stuff.
deal with this kind of a situation. So
but that's, I wonder if that's like a Freudian slip, like being manipulative, or if that was just unintentional.
Pastors are called to provide their flock with discernment, but also provide the flock with a call to true Christian gentleness, which is not to be a pushover. It's not to give in to every single thing. It's not to love your neighbor as yourself. It's to love God first and love your neighbor as yourself. It's a little more complicated.
I think he's probably right about that part, because people talk about Jesus saying turn the other cheek, but he wasn't a pushover either. A lot of people know the story about when he went into the temple and people were profiting from the religion, and he got really angry and he flipped the tables over and stuff. So even Jesus wasn't a pushover. So he's right about that.
Right? You have to get it right before you can love your neighbor at all. And so I think it's the call to
It reminds me of Jordan Peterson saying, "Get your house in order before you criticize the world," even though he has not gotten his house in order, and he was criticizing the world when he was fucking addicted to benzodiazepines and almost died from withdrawal from it. And I don't think he's increased his amount of self-awareness at all now. Sure doesn't seem that way to me.
Discernment, but also to call to the immense power that if I might speak theologically, maybe a little out of step, that Christ calls to the power of gentleness, but not a weak, flaccid gentleness, not a fake, winsome gentleness, but the kind that will call out an evil when it encounters it, a kind that will drive a demon out before it welcomes the possessed to the table to have fellowship. So you're not going to just affirm the transgender status or non-binary status. You have to drive the demon out first. But yeah, please.
Okay, you realize he just implied that transgenderism is a demon? The word transgenderism is nowhere even in the fucking Bible. Obviously, like the homophobia shit that conservative fundamentalist Christians attribute to the part of the Bible which they use to argue that God hates gay people. It was a quote about a man laying with a child, not a man specifically laying with a man as a man lays with a woman. In context of the quote, they're talking about fucking pedophilia. Like, even like, if you choose to believe that God exists and you want to see God charitably, then God is against pedophilia. He's not against homophobia, or whether you decide that God has a gender. I think a gender for God doesn't really make sense. But even if you believe that God hates gay people, the word transgender, transgenderism, transvestites, trans ideology, those words are nowhere in the Bible. Even if you think that if God hates gay people, God would be very likely to hate trans people. That's not necessarily a guarantee, too. So, like, my point is that he's just fucking making all this shit up in terms of transgenderism. That has fucking nothing at all to do with the Bible.
Please come help. Let us help you. Have dinner. Sit down with the people that are outside and try to bring them back into John 1 says the Logos. And I think that so giving that message, I think pastors
Jordan Peterson loves that word logos. He uses it all the time.
Need to think very seriously about how can I get my church to be more discerning, but also to use the power of Christian gentleness, which is not, again, flaccid or stupid. It has that meekness quality to it that stands up for what is right when it's necessary, but isn't going out and picking.
Like I said, I do like his description of Christian gentleness, and that does seem accurate in terms of Jesus, at least. I'm not sure about the Old Testament.
Fights and punching people in the nose or beating people over the head with a Bible or a 2x4, and figure out how to bring that message, because I think that message will actually help. Another one is actually in great defiance of Christian wisdom, as Donald Trump recently got in trouble for making fun of, is to encourage civic engagement.
See how he's getting his right-wing Christianity into a pro-Trump shit, even though also, obviously, in the Bible, doesn't fucking say anything about about Trump, obviously, or even conservative politics. Like, connecting this to Trump, even if you, like, it only makes sense if you believe all the fucking bullshit and lies about him being Christian, even though obviously during his first term he pretended to be all like super Christian just to court support from the evangelical Christians, who are a huge bloating I almost said bloating flock voting block for the Republicans. And obviously he seems to not be pretending to do that as much this time, but he's still appointed Supreme Court justices who overturned Roe versus Wade. So I didn't think that shit was going to matter, and it turned out to matter. But again, the point is that, like, fucking the Bible has nothing to do with Trump, and a lot of conservatives and Republicans are Christians, definitely. But Trump isn't a fucking Christian. I don't think he has any religious beliefs, and he cosplays to be a Christian. Remember when he gassed protesters so he could get a photo op in front of a church with an upside down Bible? Like, that's the epitome of a fucking Christian grifter right there.
If you want good values, if we believe that churches that have it right are centers of producing good values, and by the way, community organization, and we want that to go into the civic part of our life, then you better be encouraging Christians to get involved in civic life. It's actually the thing Marcuse said. You're going to go in and do the job. You're going to go in and you're going to be...
It depends on what you're talking about, because there are obviously a lot of different interpretations and different philosophies in terms of how involved you should get with civic life or politics. Like Stoics, for example, ancient Stoics, they were more for getting involved with politics, but the Epicureans, who were in opposition to the Stoics, were for like staying out of politics. And also the Cynics, like Diogenes the Cynic, who's one of the main figures who inspired the Stoics. He was very against getting involved with politics, but he was interesting. He was like, if you believe the legends, then he like lived in a barrel and took a shit in the street and masturbated in front of people like he was pretending to be an animal. Even if that isn't true, they're interesting legends. But yeah, it's in terms of what you're talking about, then there's a long history of Christian theology in which they advocate for not getting that involved with politics. That's less common today, but that still does happen. You actually can go to a church where you don't hear some guy talk about how awesome Trump is and how lockdowns are bad and shit like that. You actually can go to churches where they just talk about religion.
A county commissioner, and you're going to bring your Christian worldview with you. But that's not the same as going and trying to turn the county commission into a church, which is a different thing.
Oh yeah, that's another thing that he's just assuming here, that Christian means you're anti-woke and pro-Trump. Obviously, there are a fucking ton of Christians throughout the entire world who are lefty, anti-Trump Christians, or just like fucking apolitical Christians, and they don't give a shit about Trump.
Thing.
Or if they do, they separate it from their political views, or at least attempt to. Yeah, so that's Wacko James Lindsay and his newest mangling of philosophy, theology, and I don't know, like politics, history, a whole bunch of other different fields of study. Anyway, yeah, he's a pseudo intellectual crackpot and a professional mangler of philosophy as usual. And go ahead and get mad at me in the comments, or give your opinions or whatever. All right, adios until next time, nerds.